Difficult collaborators. We're talking today about working with people who are difficult. I've done it many times. And in fact, some people probably think that I'm a difficult collaborator. Maybe I am, but my stuff looks really good. So you're going to have to weigh as you go through your artistic journey whether it's worth it for you to work with certain kinds of people and when it's time to cut and run, when you just want to put up with it and just get through it and then, maybe never talk to them again or not work with them again. These are some of the options available to you for working with difficult collaborators. And I am going to give you some gossip on people that I've worked with. I won't name names, but I'll give you some examples of different kinds of situations that you might find yourself in and how you might be able to find your way out of those challenging situations. So if you can learn from my mistakes and my experience with 10 years as a filmmaker, then I'm super happy to share. So the first thing that I want to say about difficult collaborators is that working with friends is not always a great idea. And if you check out 48 Laws of Power, you'll see that he actually cautions you not to work with friends. This is because I know it sounds like a great idea, like, oh, you get along so well as friends, why wouldn't you get along at work? But there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't always translate. And one of them being that it's a completely different environment. You are under all sorts of different kinds of pressures at work and on a project than you are when you're just hanging out with somebody as a friend. And it can create a lot of strain on the relationship that the relationship might simply not be built to hold that kind of stress and that kind of strain. So don't assume that just because you get along really well as friends that you're going to be great collaborators as well. Another thing too that happens with bringing on friends to work on a project or teaming up with a friend is there's kind of this assumption that no one's going to screw each other over. That's a completely invalid assumption. You don't know that. I have seen so many times, not just on my projects, but on friends' projects, where they all go in as really close, even best friends. And by the end of the project, there's lawyers involved and maybe even a lawsuit involved. So I know that sounds crazy, but it's also crazy to make film and television. It really pushes you to your limit in terms of stress. And you're going to see people at their most stressed. You're going to see them when they're at the limit of their patience, they're at the limit of their physical energy, their mental energy. And when you see people at their worst, you really get to know them. You probably haven't seen them at their worst before, or not in this context anyway. So I think that regardless of whether you're working with a friend or just somebody random that you were referred to, you're going to want to really paper your dynamic for this project. You're going to want to get a contract, and that contract needs to be robust, and it needs to cover all of the contingencies and all of the eventualities about working with this person so that you don't find yourself in a situation where it's not spelled out on paper, like what to do if you get to this certain problem and you have no plan and you're both feeling the strain of like emotional bonds and not wanting to maybe offend the other person, but also feeling resentful because you have been potentially screwed over in this dynamic. So I think you're going to want a contract regardless of who you bring onto your projects and who you decide to work with. If you are working with friends, that goes double if you want to be friends at the end of this. So treat your friends like they're business partners so that you can remain friends. I've unfortunately lost a couple of friends over the years that I've worked with. Only a couple. I mean, for the most part, people want to work with me again. How do I know? Because they do come onto my projects again. But I feel sad about the friendships that I've lost. And, some of them I probably could pursue to try and pull it back, but I don't know that I want to. I think the stress that we endured together sort of left a scar, and I'm fine to, to just work with different people on the next one. There is certainly no shortage of talented, amazing artists out there. And you see it up at the top too. Like, I still remember the story about World War Z, the zombie movie. I love zombie movies. It's one of my favorite genres. But starred Brad Pitt, and huge budget. I mean, if you saw it, it's like a global zombie movie. And the behind the scenes gossip is that I think Plan B was involved. That's Brad Pitt's production company. So he was coming on as a producer and as a star. It's very often a vehicle that stars will use to get stuff made. But by the end of the film, Brad Pitt and the director were at such loggerheads and so just unhappy with each other that they had to have somebody speak between them. So they weren't even talking to each other. And Brad was the lead of this film. The director could not talk to him, and Brad would not talk to the director. They had to have someone translate between them. And as a director, I can't imagine how much time and effort that adds to a production day to have to go between somebody and your star. So anyway, it happens all the way up to the very top where collaborators just don't get along or stop getting along. Yeah, I could tell you some stories, and maybe it'll shed some light on what to avoid in the future. I know that, over the past 10 years, I had all sorts of different collaborators, many of them great, and many of them still friends, and, I love them dearly. I could think of a couple times where I came in to direct something and it wasn't my initial idea. And mostly where we got into trouble was in post. Like the delineation of who was supposed to do what during production, it was a little more like straightforward. Me, the director, my job is to direct the movie. And like, I'm very boundaried about that. I'm not going to let somebody horn in on my job as a director. I'm like super clear on what my job responsibilities are and how to do them. And yeah, I just like not going to let someone direct it for me. So I'm really boundaried about that. But where I got into trouble on these couple of projects was then in the post-production. We didn't super have as clear a plan in the contract of how to handle post. And I think on one or two of them, I gave away my final cut. Now, really, no self-respecting director should do that. If you're the director, especially if you're not making a lot of money, it's your vision. You get to have final cut on the edit. But at the indie level, some of these are like really passion projects for the person who came up with the original idea, so they don't want to give away final cut. So that's something that you should talk about and figure out before you even write the script, in my opinion. Like before you do any pre-production, you should just be really clear about how are we going to go about post, who's going to be in charge of it, how are we going to delegate that work. Because also another thing that I find as a director is that a lot of times producers are great in production and then in post-production they vanish. And then I'm left like watching the film, 250 times for the various tracks of edit, color, sound, music, VFX. And after a while, like I can't really see it anymore. So I need producers who can watch it and stick around post, not only to like give notes on the different rounds of posts that we have, because after a while, I can't see or hear anymore. Like I've just seen it too much to be able to judge what it needs, but also to keep me motivated, to keep the director thinking like, is this even worth moving forward? I have one project in particular where we shot it in 2023 and here it is 2026, 3 years later. I'm actually going to finish a new cut of it, but all of the producers have vanished. I think there was like 4 and I can't get a hold of any of them anymore. So you want to be clear in that contract How are we handling post? Who's going to stick around for what? Who's responsible for what? And who gets what creative say? It doesn't mean they're going to do what the contract says, but it sure is helpful to have it written down somewhere and be able to point to a piece of paper and say, hey, legally, you're supposed to do this. You'd be surprised at how often just pointing to that piece of paper becomes really, really necessary. And I'm even thinking of one time in the past couple of years where early on, there was an outline generated by a creator that I was working with. I was a director. And I forgot about the outline. And a year and a half later, when we were finally making the film, I needed to be reminded that they had generated the initial outline, which means they get some type of writing credit. And I completely forgot. And I looked like a terrible jerk or just like dishonest or, sketchy. I looked really bad for forgetting that they had generated the outline. Now, it took them a while to like send me the outline because I forgot, and they didn't feel that they had to send it to me to remind me, but ultimately they were like, look, here it is. They wrote the outline. I was like, that's right. You did write the initial outline. I wrote the second outline. Right. So that's one example of like the more documentation you have of really everything, the better it's going to go for everybody. Let's talk about rounds of scripts. So if you are writing the project as well, and you've been hired like a work for hire, and maybe it's an independent production, you want to be clear about how many rounds you're going to be delivering. And it's not bad to put a number on it. You can go beyond that number if you want, but it's good to say, okay, I'm going to deliver this maximum amount of rounds on the script, and that's what I'm going to be paid for. Just so that you're not rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, into eternity, and there's nothing you can do. Like, you're kind of a slave to the producers who are just making you do as many rounds as they want, or, the director or whoever. So you want to kind of boundary the amount of rewrites that you promise of yourself. You can also, as the writer director, or if you're a producer on the project too, depending on what your role is on the project, you can insist on having a say in the writing. So for the most part, I don't take on films or shows anymore unless I can do what's called a director's pass. And this is a pass on the script that's close to the final draft. So we're getting close to production, where I, as the director, can go through and do a quality check on the script and maybe brush some things up, clarify some jokes, make sure that the characters are developing in the way that I need them to in order to get to the final product that I have in mind. And if they don't want me to do a director's pass, I'm like, why? Why wouldn't you want like a better version of your film? These changes can be negotiable, but yeah, I think that if someone doesn't want to let me do a director's pass on their project, I kind of see that as a red flag, unless they're really paying me. If they're paying me enough, then I will do whatever they say. But I haven't gotten access to those kind of jobs yet. I can think of one example where I was working on this comedic project, and comedy, the writing is really important because you have to get the jokes in. And I worked with them at length on the script to improve it. By the time I was done with it, I think I had done 5 drafts of like writing and rewriting with her alone. And it was actually like pretty funny by the time I was done. And then she was like, I just want to do one more pass on it before we go into pre-production. She's like, I just want to tweak a couple things. And I remember she took a 9-page script and made it a 14-page script. So she increased it by more than 50% in length. And the jokes got lengthened, and like there was a lot more air. It wasn't as tight. There was some weird stuff in it after that. So I was like, okay, for this tiny budget amount to add 5 pages and for you to not understand that that's a huge problem for production, like this just isn't this isn't going to work. Plus you just casually like overnight rewrote almost everything that I had done over the past 5 drafts. So, yeah, at that point I just walked away. We had a contract. We had put in writing like I was obligated to direct this thing for her and she was obligated to move forward with me. But we were both like, we don't really want to work with each other anymore. She didn't like what I was doing. I didn't like what she did. So even though we had a contract, we were like, great, goodbye. We're just going to go our separate ways and never speak of it again. Wish her well. Hope she shot it and hope it was good and funny. And, with comedy too, like you could find something on the day that is completely not in the script that is much better than what is in the script, just because that's the magic that the actors bring on the set on that day. So who knows? Maybe that happened and like my stinky old script was totally unnecessary. I don't know. But in this case, I would call them a difficult collaborator and she would probably call me the same. It brings up a good point though. What to do when someone is in violation of their contract? Well, that can look a lot of different ways. I don't think you want to go to court. Going to court is not fun. It's very stressful. It's expensive. Most lawyers cost a lot of money. Some cost a lot of money. And it just takes up a lot of mental bandwidth and emotional bandwidth. It's like you end up losing so much money because of the lost time to go to court. So I want to avoid court if at all possible. I've never been to court. I don't want to start now. Although I think once you reach a certain amount of success, it's inevitable because people think you have money, so they want to sue you. Anyway, if someone violates your contract, there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, you can just politely and kindly tell them that what is happening is not what's in the contract. And sometimes they just need to be reminded of that. Like, don't go straight to the red. Just politely remind them that as per the contract, you need to follow a certain, protocol. As per the contract, you're supposed to do things a certain way. That's not how they're getting done right now. So they need to change their behavior so that the contract is honored. So that's step number 1. If they ignore you, or if they disrespect you when you try to bring that to their attention, the next step is to get a friend who is a lawyer, or get your lawyer, or have some sort of legal counsel on the email chain. And you can just say, hey, I'm following up on this. My lawyer's on the chain, or such and such legal counsel's on the chain. I really don't want to have to escalate this. So, just reminding you that this is not what the contract states. If you're a crew, there's certain labor unions that I think you can contact. I mean, definitely if you're in the union, you can go that route. If it's a SAG production, you can complain to SAG if it's like actor related. Yeah, you can complain to certain labor boards within your city or state about certain organizations, like if they're not paying you, for example. And you can also take to social media. A lot of directors, producers, production companies, studios, they're really scared of getting bad press and getting bad shout outs on social media and getting flamed. So, just like anything else, like freaking Delta or Airbnb or H&R Block or whatever, you have a bad experience, like you can go on social media and say, hey, this person, I don't know, hasn't paid me in 9 months for the work that I did. And I'd really like to be paid. Does anyone have any advice, or has anyone had experience working with them? That can work. So that's like a social pressure campaign. There was one thing that happened recently where an editor who I really, really like and I considered a friend, I decided to, after he did a couple of rounds with a project, I decided to hire a new editor. And, the edits just weren't getting into festivals. So, which I was so disappointed by. Like, I didn't blame him. I actually blamed myself for not being able to guide the edit better. But anyway, when he found out that I was going to hire a new editor, I believe he got upset. I don't know because he just stopped responding to my emails and my texts, which was really unlike him. But after like 3 or 4 months of me consistently asking him to return the hard drives with the film on it, and these were not cheap hard drives, he was not responding. I finally did the lawyer thing with the email. And then I also said, I'm going to need the hard drives back or I'm going to file a police report on Monday. And he wrote back, I think, within the hour. So yeah, that's just a tough situation. You know, it's like we're not really paid enough for any of these conversations. Like in indie film, like no one's really getting paid that much. So you end up putting your heart into it because that's all that you're getting out of it is like your connection to the material and your connection to your collaborators. And that's why these difficult collaborators, like they hit so hard sometimes with indie film because it's like that's all you have is the connection. You're making like $10 a day, if that, you know, on some of these things as a creative. So it can be really tough when these kinds of relationships go south. And in a way, a lot of times at the higher levels, it's like you're paid so much that you end up just viewing it as a job. You're not so concerned with the relational dynamics. It's like you're paid to not care. You're paid to do your job and not care. But yeah, at the indie film level, that is just usually not the case. So you end up with like less pay, more stress, more conflict, and, you know, sometimes a film that isn't even done because of some of the issues that I've spoken about. Many indie projects are never completed. And that was part of why I pushed forward that one that had it needed the new edit, because I was like, damn if I'm going to be one of those directors that has an unfinished film sitting in the can that's never seen the light of day. And it's because I am too scared to have one conversation, one hard, scary conversation. But really, I'm going to let this film die because I'm not willing to have a hard conversation? No. And now I'm super happy with the new editor. So anyway, I hope these examples are helpful to you and inspiring, not too scary. And if any of this was helpful to you, I would love to hear from you. We get a lot of listeners to the show and a lot of downloads, but rarely do I get people DMing me being like, hey, you know, I took your advice on this thing and it worked. So I don't know if any of this works for you guys. I want to hear from you. DM me. I'm at Misha Calvert on Instagram. You can DM the team as well at Club for Million on Instagram. And we're on YouTube as well on my page, Misha Calvert. But yeah, these are some of the difficult collaborators that I've worked with over the years. And I hope that you never have to deal with anything like this. May your path forward be clear and full of perfect collaboration always. See you next week.
The Vermilion podcast is sponsored by Vermilion, a home for artists. We offer classes, coaching, and community for creatives and innovators in the arts. If you're ready to find your voice and build the life of your dreams, we're here to support you every step of the way. Check out clubvermilion.com and schedule a free call today.